Hey, let's bring in our first guest of the day on FT Live, our friend, and sometimes plays her best Scott Braun impression better than Scott Braun does. Britt Ghiroli from The Athletic joining us right now. You like that line? Britt, great to see you. Let's just bring the Toronto Blue Jays conversation here first for a quick sec, because we've been covering this team the last few years thinking that they're at one point a sleeper to be a World Series team. Now the last couple of years, people are just like, oh, this team should be in the World Series with that rotation and some of the superstar potential in there. Are you satisfied with their offseason so far?
No, not at all. I think, listen, a lot of their offseason was obviously predicated on the idea that they were going to be a serious player for Shohei Ohtani. So no matter what now, it kind of feels like a letdown, right? Had they got Ohtani, we'd be talking about how Toronto really is one of, if not the team to beat in the American League, and just how that really changes the power dynamic in the AL East. But honestly, guys, it's funny. I was talking to a front office person yesterday about this, but is the window closing? Is it almost closed when you think about Toronto? Because you look at these guys like Vladdy and Bo Bichette, and they really haven't gotten better the way we projected them to, right? So are they closing this window for a championship? Because, this city is pretty starved. They haven't had a whole lot of success, particularly in the postseason, in quite some time. And you just wonder if you're going to look back on it and say, that's the epitome of a team where we all thought, look at this young core coming up. They're going to get veterans when the time is right, and they're going to go to, 2, 3, 4 league championships, maybe a World Series here and there. And they haven't. They haven't been able to replicate that success since the 1990s. And I just wonder if it's going to take another group of new faces before they get there again. So no, I'm not satisfied with their winter at all. I think they needed to go out and spend a lot of money and show people that this is the time, and they haven't really done that, even though we know they've tried, right? We know they've gone after Ohtani. But to me, the plan B that they're now executing leaves a lot to be desired.
Sorry, Britt, I got a call from the Orioles. They were like, wait a minute, are you talking about us in 3 years, 4 years? Is that what? I just
That's
didn't.
Another team. Yes.
It's another team. But you said at the beginning of your whole statement, welcome again. You're one of my favorite hosts. Scott has now moved down to number 3. But you said, yeah, they've had kind of a disappointing offseason. Sans Dodgers, who hasn't?
Yeah,
had a disappointing offseason.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's been a really slow burn, guys. I was off for like 2 weeks around the holidays. I came back and, I had carved out a half a day to catch up on everything I missed. I missed nothing. It turns out I missed nothing. Nothing has happened. So you're right. You can't just pigeonhole Toronto and say they haven't done anything when, hello, Baltimore Orioles here in my backyard who, probably aren't going to get a frontline pitcher, which is all they've needed. So you look around, and if everyone has mediocre off seasons, does that mean you don't fall behind the pack, right? Is that the way to look at it, I guess? If you're a Toronto or you're a Baltimore, is that the Yankees get Juan Soto? I would say the Yankees off season has been okay. Even though he is a rental, we all know he's headed to free agency. They do get that, power bat that they so needed that fits that stadium very well. But otherwise, you're right. It's a whole lot of C's, right? Just passing grades for these teams. And part of it is it's a very weak position player, free agent class past Ohtani. We're still waiting on Cody Bellinger to sign, right? And obviously we've got Snell and Montgomery, and there's a lot of pieces that are still going to come off the board. But I think, this has been really a downer of a hot stove for MLB in general. I kind of think back to the Harper Machado year where nothing happened until those two signed really in March. And it kind of has felt like that. Even though there's no Bryce Harper and Manny Machado at the end of this rainbow. There's some Blake Snells and there's some exciting pieces here. But yeah, the Orioles, in my mind, they're up there with Toronto. They may even get a lower grade, guys, because they have the pieces to trade. They have the ability to trade for Dylan Cease. Now, is it too high? That is in the eye of the beholder. Is the cost too high if you don't have another choice? I don't know. They lose Kyle Gibson, who was such a force in their clubhouse. He pitched, I think it was right around 190 innings, and they haven't replaced him. Where do those innings come from? They're not going to get a Blake Snell. So if you don't trade for Dylan Cease and you don't use that prospect capital to make an impact move, are you just betting that there's going to be pieces there in July for you? Are you just betting that all these guys who performed very well and above their projections are going to continue to do that? It's a really precarious spot that they're in for sure.
Let's not ignore the fact the division they play in makes this kind of the whole tough thing. They won 89 games. I think that would have won the AL Central by a few games. I think if they want to keep up with these teams, they're going to have to make a splash. I know we just talked right before you got on here about their lineup and who they brought back. I know you said Kiermaier. Are there any other lefty bats? Like, is it a 0% chance for Cody Bellinger to land there if they wanted to make that big splash? What other lefty bats exist out there on the market right now? Because they're kind of a right-handed dominant lineup here.
Yeah, I was looking at it. There's not a whole lot because the Nationals, that's their primary hole too. Is the Nationals need a left-handed like power bat. Brandon Belt is kind of that next level a little bit, but there's not a whole lot, which is part of the reason why I think Cody Bellinger hasn't signed. They're holding out, hoping that he gets a really significant payday because he's a lot of teams' only option right now, including, like you said, Toronto. And, obviously the Chicago Cubs want to bring him back. And there's just a lot of interest because there aren't any options. So, yes, I agree with you on Toronto. If they were in another division, we may have viewed it through a different lens on one hand. On the other, the Rogers Center, they're a publicly traded team, right? So they're trying to get upgrades to the stadium and they're trying to really sell all these luxury boxes. If you're going to do that, you have to give people a reason to believe that you are committed to this team winning. And that means bringing out the big guns. That means getting the big names. Yes, getting Ohtani would have absolutely changed the whole direction of that franchise, the whole direction of baseball in Canada as a country. But if you get a guy like Bellinger, that still makes people believe, okay, they're trying, they're really going for it. We know Toronto has money to spend. We have heard Ross Atkins talk about them wanting to be aggressive, wanting to push the envelope. And like I said, I think there is a belief that they are at the point where that window is going to start shutting. So, if I'm Toronto, I'm going out there very strongly after Cody Bellinger because there aren't a whole lot of other options. I mean, as I mentioned, Brandon Belt, we're getting into a significant drop-off here now. We're getting into a point where you're looking at guys who are either old or you're really hoping to have bounce-back years or, you're not sure how much longer they're going to play. So Bellinger is a guy who is young enough to be that veteran centerpiece of a team that's going to be good for the next couple of years. He's a guy who can do that for you. He can do that for a Toronto Blue Jays, for a Washington Nationals, who I don't think will be in play for Bellinger at all. But, he, in my opinion, is one of those guys left that will make a team say, you know what, we didn't win the offseason. That already went to the Dodgers, the second that they got Yamamoto after getting Ohtani. But you know what? We did better than most other teams, and I think that's how you have to play it right now.
You know what the Blue Jays should say? They should tell their fan base, we want to go full throttle. I feel like that's like an original term that someone should use at some point when they really want to go for it. So just in case that was used in Boston, I just want to clarify that Tom Warner, who's part of the ownership group, was asked this week about the comment. And he basically said, and I'll use at least one part of the line that he gave back, it was not the, quote, most artful comment, but he does believe that Craig Breslow is going to build a winning team ahead of opening day. And here's one more line from him. I quote, I guess the message is that we are confident we're going to field a competitive team. We're going to let Craig do what he does best, which is to build exactly that. It sounded like, and I'll paraphrase completely here, when Breslow spoke this week to Pete Abraham, that he basically said, oh, we're going to let the young kids play and have a good time, which to me means we're going to be in last place because our pitching sucks and we've got a nice young core that's going to take the next, 2 years to build if we don't add stars on free agency to do so. So what do you think about the Red Sox duping their fan base?
Yeah, it's funny because I think somebody wrote that recently, as recent as last month. Red Sox still believe they can make impact moves, and now you're seeing them walk it all back, and it's become, we changed over baseball operations. That restarts the clock that all these executives love to play on, these 3 to 5 year clocks. Well, you can't possibly now have Breslow be responsible for Chaim Bloom's clock, so now the whole process starts back over, and this year becomes a year to evaluate, right? I think it's all BS. I think if the Red Sox wanted to be the Red Sox again, they could have gone, flexed their financial might, and gotten a few pieces to shorten this up. I think people that are Red Sox fans are irritated with, the general direction of ownership and the way this team is run, which is not like they're the Boston Red Sox. It's like they're Milwaukee Brewers, and I think if you look at Boston and you look at some of their holes and look at the division they're in, if you're not going to make any upgrades, you're going to get left in the dust. And that's exactly what's going to happen here, because we talked about the Yankees having one of the better off seasons. we talked about how the Orioles haven't really done anything, but on paper, the Orioles are ahead of Boston when it comes to their big league ready young talent. Those guys have already been in the big leagues for a year. They've already proven they could handle this arena, this stage, the Gunnar Hendersons, the Adley Rutschmans. So they already have that one up. Tampa Bay is good every year. And we talked about Toronto, who really is probably one big name away from being a legitimate threat to win that division. So where does that leave the Boston Red Sox, but in the basement? And I just don't know going forward what the plan is going to be from Craig Breslow, who inherited a very big job and inherited an organization that isn't sure what they want to do. We've heard all these different directives from ownership. At first it was, we need to be efficient, and they were obsessed with cap space and getting under the luxury tax. And now we hear that they're going to be aggressive again, and they're going to be the Red Sox again, and they're walking that back. So I just don't know if they have a clear sense of where they are headed and what they are doing, especially if they're going to let these young guys play. That is a 2-year process, maybe longer, maybe 3 to 4, before you're actually playing in these American League Championship Series type games again. And that's an eternity if you're a Boston Red Sox fan.
It's kind of, it's probably very frustrating for the Red Sox fans to have their team operate as a small market team for a few years. It must be terrible on them to have to deal with. People go through this sometimes, and you look at the rest of the division as you just spoke about. Is it the worst idea? No fan's going to want to give up on the next year or two, but is it the worst idea to look across your division, look at all these other teams that are in a win now mode, maybe save some bullets, play the young guys, see what you got there, and then make your move here in about 2 or 3 years, maybe when some of these players are coming off the books on these other teams, and that might be your time to strike. No fan wants to hear that, but that might be the best way for Boston to get back there.
But does anyone believe in 2 to 3 years that Tampa Bay is all of a sudden not going to be competitive?
No.
Does anybody believe in 2 to 3 years that the Orioles, with the game's best farm system and a whole bunch of young players now, are not going to be competitive? Those guys are still under team control. Does anybody believe that the New York Yankees, after missing the playoffs last year and, the huge firestorm that we've seen, are all of a sudden in 2 to 3 years going to lay down? Right? So you can't play like that when you're in the division that you're in, I think, at all, especially when you have the financial resources of the Boston Red Sox. So, no, I think that the trendy thing for a while was to tank and then to try. But front offices are realizing now how damaging that is. They're trying to avoid that now. You are seeing less tanking because the game has also de-incentivized it, but also because it doesn't work. For every Houston Astros, fairy tale story, there's 10 other teams who tried and it didn't get done. So there's no guarantee that even if the Red Sox do this tank and try, that even if they're not going to be good for the next couple of years, that when it's their turn, that they're going to actually compete and that they're going to be the Red Sox again. I mean, it is hard to win, and they are in a division where these teams are almost all in win now scenarios for, I would say, the next 4, 5, even 6 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. By the way, who is it? Bourbon and Baseball in the chat said, do you think that's why it took so long for someone to accept the GM job? Yeah. I mean, we've had multiple people on here as guests that have said they've spoken to talented front office executives that have turned the job down because they don't feel like it's a respected job and it makes you look bad. It's a reputation killer to an extent. I mean, obviously Dave Dombrowski's not going to get his reputation killed for winning a World Series and then them letting him go and then him having success in Philadelphia. But point is, it's a messy job compared to most others. And those guys or girls, when they get an opportunity like that, they want stability. So, all right, let me take you to the news in the past 24 hours on the media front. So the excuse of the offseason by far from ownership is TV money. We can't do anything. We've lost it all, right? So now we have this deal surfacing with Bally's and Amazon, and keeping in mind, it's a complicated story in terms of how all the regional networks work, but we'll try and keep it high end because obviously people can Google and read tons of articles, including many in The Athletic, about what's going on here. What's your take on if Amazon gets involved on this front? Because I know you and me both have worked for the league in the past. And the one thing I do know is that the league would love to control all of the media and kind of have it all run from within the league office. But it doesn't sound like A, that would be lucrative, and B, that would be some authentic baseball content. That's how I read it if I'm like from a fan's perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the same. I also think, MLB has long salivated over what the NFL has, right? Which is everybody just splits the pie up. You don't have to worry about this big market, small market. The league gets all of the money. They divide it all up. It's all under one umbrella. There's like a million reasons that won't work. One is that, the NFL is a very lucrative short season and all of those games are on national TV. Obviously with baseball, you're just not going to have the Royals, Brewers Wednesday afternoon game, broadcast on these national networks. It just doesn't make any sense. But MLB was kind of on the precipice, guys, of having at least 15, which would be half the league, and their rights, had this deal not happened, had Amazon not stepped in and said, hey, we'll invest in Diamond Sports Group. Hey, we'll help you guys out of bankruptcy in exchange, for a part of this newly formed company that they're going to have. And, it's my understanding that the 11 teams that Diamond Sports Group has, are going to fall under this umbrella. 5 of those teams, their streaming rights are owned by Diamond Sports. So you will be able to, if you're an in-market consumer, watch those on Amazon Prime. And now I think from MLB's perspective, why this was such a gut punch is those other 11 teams, which would have been free of all of this at the end of 2024, are now enveloped in a company that is probably not going to go bankrupt anymore. And now these teams can keep negotiating with Diamond Sports Group and Amazon about their individual TV rights, right? Now it kind of renders MLB, which was the savior or hoping to be the savior and have all these rights fall into their lap, it renders them kind of useless here. Because if they had those 15 rights, they could have gone to Amazon themselves. They could have gone to Hulu or anywhere and said, hey, we've got this great package, 15 teams, you could own half the league's rights, and they could have negotiated a streaming package and made money off of it. But now they are really an unnecessary party here because Diamond Sports Group, with this infusion of cash that Amazon is reportedly going to give them, is not going to be bankrupt. They're going to change their direction. And with that, you really are kind of boxing MLB out of not only controlling all of the rights, which, as we said, probably a pipe dream, but now they're not even going to be able to go to Prime and say, hey, we have all these rights, we'd like to sell them. And even if all of these teams decide we want to be done with Diamond, you are now negotiating at a lesser cost. I mean, this is a huge player in Amazon Prime that MLB was hoping to take something to that now is already involved. So it just changes the whole process of who has the power, and it definitely shifts that power away from MLB.
Hey, Kratz, before you ask a question, just wanted to add on to what she's saying. It's a comment. So, and maybe it's a somewhat hot take. MLB doesn't realize this yet, but this is great news for them long term to have another place involved and not them just doing everything. It's just bad when one company is controlling everything. And that includes the content that's going on the screen. If it's one step removed and a place has to be critical, if it's coming from the league, they're going to stomp on it, even if it's good for the game to talk about a topic. If they're one step removed and it's Bally's and Amazon, and you get a call from an owner complaining to the league, they're going to say, it's not our network. If it's the league, they have to address it. And they're going to call producers and broadcasters and say, hey, so you know how the Orioles owner just said he's not going to sign guys for over 150 mil or he's going to charge extra for seats? That's a crazy topic that everyone wants to talk about for the week, but we can't talk about it. And we're the only place to go for these games. So if you take that one step away, I think it's actually going to help them and ultimately make them more money. And also, if you have more places working for you to collect money and do sales, if it's all coming from one place, in my mind, this is just my entrepreneurial brain, I think it's a loss. I just don't think they realize that.
That's fair. Yeah. And I also think, too, that Amazon Prime is a big deal. Everyone gets Prime. Everyone has Prime, right? You're not like putting yourself on Peacock, which people got so upset when the NFL did that, right, for one of the playoff games. So this is actually a really good thing in my mind as well for that reason. And now I think if you look at what, MLB is going to be able to do, I mean, now you kind of have to look at it as, are they going to try to retain some of these teams that they already have? Are they going to try to sell these mini packages, sell the Padres to Prime? I don't know how that's going to work, but I do think that it's better if Amazon Prime has these games and they're not under that just singular umbrella.
Yeah, Amazon's a great brand. Sorry, Kratz, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I this is all like, I'm just trying to learn all this. Like, to me, when all this came out, it was written, I think it was Alden's article.
Gonzalez.
Alden Gonzalez's, thank you. His article, he was like, well, they were kind of floored. They were surprised by this. What was MLB's plan? Was it just to be like, oh, well, we're just going to be here to kind of wait and see until everything hits rock bottom. And then we'll just be like, oh, we'll just swoop this up. It's like MLB doesn't have a plan. And if they had gotten it, just like Scott said, it's like you probably would have run it like, I hate to use the word monopoly, but a monopolistic view. And we just only ever see how the certain people that make decisions in MLB will help grow the game. And I don't think that's good. So what was their plan before Amazon came in to like help this whole situation out, other than, oh, well, we'll just take it all once nobody else can afford it?
Well, and Brady, you spot on, because also if the league runs the whole thing eventually, what companies will do is they will try and obviously contract jobs and kind of centralize everything, right? So that includes pre and post game shows or any kind of content revolving around teams. And we know in our sport, the MLB is not the NFL. So when you have the pre and the post on CBS and Fox and all these spots right before and after games, and then they start talking about the rest of the league, that works for the NFL. That does not work for Major League Baseball. So you need to have 30 separate shows and content plans, and not just like two people saying, hey, thanks for watching Yankees Red Sox. Now let's talk about the Pirates and do a live look for 20 minutes. That doesn't work.
Does this help blackouts in any way?
It might, like, say you're an in-market fan and you cut cable, right, and you don't feel like paying for MLB TV, then I think it does, right? Especially if you're one of those 5 teams that there is streaming rights to. I think, for example, the Detroit Tigers are one of them. So, if you don't get Bally Sports Detroit and you were tired of, paying for your cable package or whatever, but you have Amazon Prime and you live in Detroit or in that, greater metro area, my understanding is you will now be able to watch those games. Now, the question nobody can answer is there an additional fee? Does it come with Prime Video? Do you have to pay some kind of, premium access? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows yet what that's going to look like. But I do think it could help, because a lot of people, like myself included, have cut cable. And unless you're buying the whole league package, which is what I buy every year because I care about all 30 teams, most people just care about one. Unless you're doing it, that way, you're not able to watch your team. So it should help. And getting back to your question, Kratz, MLB was in they were in mediation. They were basically talking things over with Diamond, where they were trying to reach some kind of resolution for this year. That was all they were worried about, was this year, what was going to happen to those 11 teams that Diamond had. Because MLB saw the big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which was at the end of 24, they would take all those teams, because Diamond Sports Group was really on track to be liquidated this year. So they were not going to exist anymore. So that's kind of what MLB was doing, is that they were under the impression that they were just negotiating some way to get these teams paid, some temporary Band-Aid over basically a bullet hole for this whole solution. And now Amazon steps in at the last minute with a Hail Mary of cash and says, wait, we don't need to go liquidate this. Let's form a new company. Here's some money. We'll take all these things over to Prime. So MLB, if you read all the quotes, they were totally blindsided. They didn't know this was even an option. They didn't know that this was as close to done as it's certainly being reported that it is. And so that was their whole role in this, is to kind of, as you said, kind of catch everybody, kind of be that golden parachute, like, hey, come over here, we'll put you on our network, just like we did with San Diego, right? That was what they thought. They didn't think they had any hindrance, any obstacles in the way. And then Amazon showed up, and now we're talking about a decidedly different model moving forward.
Brilliant move by Amazon, by the way, Kratz, trying to educate you as much as possible, because think about it. Would you rather negotiate with a company that is in bankruptcy and more open to creative ideas, or with a company that controls everything and has all the leverage, right? So would they rather negotiate with MLB when they have all the teams, or would they rather negotiate with Bally's, who is going to probably play nicer in the sandbox with them?
100%.
Yeah,
it's easy.
So it's cool. It's been fun to follow. I think this is a huge win. If it all goes through, I think there's still a lot that has to be figured out. But if it all goes through, I think it's a massive win for baseball fans. So stay tuned on that front. Britt, great to see you. Thank you. So actually, wait, one more thing. One more follow-up, because I remember this from earlier on the Nationals. Are they going to do anything this offseason in the Jason Worth realm of bringing that next wave of talent through, right? Like, you can debate Worth's production on the field a little bit if the contract was worth it. But I think most people would say that was like a a demarcation line. Like, now we're trying again. This is going to be a competitive team. Sure, we're a little early, but actually most of the time teams are not that early. We thought the Rangers were early and they won the freaking World Series. So why aren't the Nationals taking a plan like that? In my mind, and through some things behind the scenes that I've talked to with people that are somewhat important, I've heard it has to do with ownership and the fact that they are still looking to kind of test the waters and see if they'll sell the team. And if that's the case, they don't want to wrap up these massive contracts with free agents, especially ones that are 30 plus. I think Soto was a separate case.
Yeah, that's correct. There's so much uncertainty at the top is what I have heard, and it still remains that way. And it kind of hamstrings what Mike Rizzo can do. And they've really essentially done nothing if you look at this offseason. Now, they're going to have to do something, right? This can't be it for the Washington Nationals in terms of like their offseason plans. But I don't think, and I mentioned this earlier, Cody Bellinger is a great example, right? That's a signing where you're like, okay, they believe that we could be good in 2025. They're going to bring this guy in. They're going to pay him a lot of money, and we're going to have that veteran presence again. Like, we're going to be legit. That's just not going to happen. That's not in the cards. I don't think ownership sees it that way. They right now want to keep their assets down, keep that payroll low, and hopefully figure out a solution to their own mind-numbing TV issues and then find a buyer, because that's really what's holding up their sale is the continued litigation with Masson and the Orioles over TV rights. So, you look at the Nationals and don't forget that anyone buying that team is paying Steven Strasburg's contract. They're paying deferred money to Max Scherzer for a long time. They're paying Patrick Corbin's salary for the next couple of years. There is money on the books for the Nationals. It is a little bit of buyer's remorse on some of these deals that they kicked out so far. So if the Nationals right now if you take all that out, their payroll is small, but they can't take that payroll out. And anybody looking to buy that team is going to look at those checks and balances. So right now, don't expect anything exciting. I mentioned their top need for a lefty power bat. I also mentioned that there's not a whole lot out there. So for Nationals fans, unfortunately, it looks like they're just going to keep playing the young guys, keep giving people who wouldn't have a chance to be in the big leagues otherwise a chance on the Washington Nationals, and really look at 2025 as kind of that year where they feel like Dylan Cruz could be a guy who, really has it together, Jackson Rutledge, I think they're really looking at 2025 as a time to kind of push their chips in and maybe, just maybe, have a little bit more certainty when it comes to that ownership role.
So they're doing take a try.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're pulling it up. They're pulling it. It's the division that plays a big factor on that then.
True. Yeah, it's a tough division. I know one thing. If you have a problem, don't bring it into baseball because it'll just last forever. The Nats and Orioles TV situation, blackouts, the Rays and A's ballpark situation, all of these things have existed since I was essentially in diapers. So maybe one day something will get solved. But in the meantime, Britt, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you can follow Britt at Britt_Ghiroli. Check out her work in The Athletic, and obviously she's on SNY and on here. So Britt, great to see you, and we'll talk to you soon. And hopefully one or two out of the 1 billion free agents sign in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Fingers crossed. Yes. Thanks, guys. Take care.